Have you ever walked away from a conversation, got to your car, and just immediately started agonizing over every single word you said? Yeah, if that sounds familiar, you are definitely not alone. Welcome to today's explainer on the psychology of overthinking. Today, we're going to look at some really fascinating research to unpack exactly why your brain just won't let that conversation go, and more importantly, how we can finally find some peace of mind. It usually kicks off with a thought exactly like this: I shouldn't have said that. Oh man, we've all been there, right? It's a completely universal yet utterly exhausting experience. You're basically playing the tape backward in your head, dissecting a totally normal chat until it feels like an absolute disaster, convinced you made a terrible mistake. And then, of course, the spiral continues. Why did I word it that way? Did they think I'm rude? Did I literally just embarrass myself in front of everyone? But here's what's actually really cool. This isn't just you being neurotic. It's actually your brain constantly scanning for social threats. You see, just like our ancient ancestors had to protect themselves from physical threats and rejection from the tribe to survive, your modern nervous system is trying to do the exact same protective job. It's just, well, it's operating at a volume that is way too high for a casual coffee break. Okay, let's dive into this, because psychologists actually have a clinical term for this anxiety loop. It's called post-event processing. Basically, it's defined as overthinking and analyzing a social situation after the fact, to check for perceived fatal flaws or mistakes. So your brain is doing this intense retroactive audit to see if you somehow revealed that you're awkward or boring or just don't belong in the group. Now, what's really wild here is the massive disconnect between what your brain thinks it's doing and what's actually happening. Your brain perceives all this overthinking as highly productive. It thinks, hey, if I just analyze this interaction enough, I'll solve the puzzle, I'll find closure, I'll figure out what they really meant. But the actual reality, you aren't finding answers at all. You are just fueling a cycle of rumination, distress, and creating even more anxiety. Treating this loop like a puzzle to solve is a total trap. So, why on earth do we fall into this trap so easily? Well, let's peel back the first layer of the onion, starting with the illusion of being noticed. We just naturally assume that everyone around us is heavily scrutinizing our every little social blooper. But in reality, they probably aren't even looking your way. Most people are just busy thinking about their own lives, their own worries, and their own conversations. And this brilliantly illustrates something known as the spotlight effect. Discovered in a landmark year 2000 Cornell University study, it explains exactly why we constantly think we're on center stage. It basically happens through a few cognitive shortcuts. First, there's the anchoring and adjustment bias, where we start with our own intense feelings and just fail to adjust to how little others actually notice us. Then there's egocentric bias, meaning your own experiences are just vividly louder to you than anyone else's. And finally, the curse of knowledge. You know you're nervous, so you wrongly assume everyone else has access to that same internal information. Spoiler alert, they don't. But, for a lot of us, this goes way beyond a simple cognitive glitch in the moment. Let's dig a little deeper into the developmental roots of overthinking. If you grew up in an environment where you felt like you had to walk on eggshells, or if you experienced a lot of judgment, conflict, or felt you had to be overly careful with your words, your mind actually learned to replay conversations. It became a highly tuned protective defense mechanism to prevent future pain. Take a look at this really compelling research out of Eastern Illinois University. It specifically links childhood maltreatment, particularly emotional abuse and neglect, to elevated social anxiety symptoms in young adults. The data shows that when people face emotional maltreatment early on, they often develop a hypervigilance in social interactions. They obsessively replay conversations because, in their past, missing a social cue or saying the wrong thing had very real, very negative consequences. This connects perfectly to the theories of psychoanalyst Donald Winnicott. He described how early environmental failure shapes us. When our emotional needs go unmet, or caregiver responses are unreliable and lack accurate emotional mirroring, kids learn to mistrust their environment. But crucially, they also learn to mistrust themselves. They basically learn to hide their true potential just to avoid the pain of rejection. So the crucial point here is this stark contrast. To survive an unreliable environment, the research shows we develop what's called a false self. This is that people-pleasing social mask we wear to avoid getting hurt. But it often leaves us feeling completely drained, emotionally numb, or like our actions are totally forced. We end up hiding our authentic self, which is the part of us grounded in our deep-seated values, our true skills, and our capacity for genuine connection. When we operate mostly from that false self, we naturally overanalyze everything because we're absolutely terrified that the mask might slip. But hey, Here is the really good news found in all this research. You absolutely do not have to live your entire life performing under an imaginary spotlight. Escaping this exhausting rumination loop, it's entirely possible. So let's shift gears and look at exactly how the experts suggest we can break this cycle, build up our resilience, and finally find some real, lasting relief. The first step might sound a little counterintuitive, but it is incredibly powerful. Embrace the uncertainty. In exposure therapy, a totally tried and true method for overcoming this kind of anxiety is to face the fear of the unknown head on. When your brain is screaming, "Did they hate what I said? What did they think?" You don't try to solve it. Instead, you simply repeat to yourself, "I may never know." You literally just sit with that discomfort. By accepting that you might never know what the other person actually thought, you effectively short-circuit that whole anxiety loop. Beyond that, there are some proven, evidence-based ways to actively rewire the brain. Approaches like rumination-focused cognitive behavioral therapy and metacognitive therapy help you identify these repetitive thoughts as false alarms, rather than concrete facts. Adding mindfulness and present moment awareness allows you to observe your thoughts without getting tangled up in them. It's really about shifting your energy to focus on what you can actually control and stopping that awful habit of shooting yourself, telling yourself you should have done this or that, right out of your own joy. Which brings us to the final and honestly most practical layer of our explainer today, practicing emotional intelligence. This is exactly how we rebuild our mindset on a day-to-day basis and truly find relief from all that post-event processing. Emotional intelligence gives us the actual tools to pause before the spiral takes over. I really want you to consider this for a second. If you talk to others the way you talk to yourself, would you have any friends left? Seriously, think about it. When a friend messes up, you offer grace, right? You offer understanding and support. But when you mess up, your internal fight or flight response goes on the attack. We have to recognize that this harsh self-criticism is not helping us. It's a survival response from the past, not a pathway to connection or growth. Let's see how this builds into a highly actionable strategy. The next time you catch yourself replaying every tiny detail of a conversation, hit pause and run through this emotional intelligence check. Ask yourself 3 things. Number 1, did I speak with honesty and respect? Number 2, am I focusing on facts right now or just my own anxious assumptions? And number 3, is there anything I can actually learn from this, or am I just criticizing myself? If you can answer those questions and honestly say, "I showed up as my authentic self," then you've got to give yourself permission to let the conversation go. You do not have to be perfect to be worthy of respect. Every single conversation doesn't have to be some flawless performance. The goal isn't to say everything perfectly. The goal is simply to communicate with authenticity, kindness, and confidence. And that leaves us with this final, empowering thought. Sometimes the greatest act of emotional intelligence is choosing not to relive a conversation that's already over. The more you trust yourself, the less you're going to feel the need to meticulously review every interaction. So step out of that imaginary spotlight, stop the replay, and give yourself the grace to just be human. So what about you? Do you ever replay conversations in your head? What's one thought you catch yourself repeating that you are going to commit to letting go of today? Think on that. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and I'll catch you next time.